war, that the one thing that they do have is mobile phone networks because the warlords need to talk to each other. But it doesn't really help the citizens. And once they recover, they need a way to generate an economy. And so, a lot of these countries in Africa, Asia, and South America, they basically said, we need resources, we need experts, we need money, and we can't do it alone because we pay so much money in debt. We just need the help. And when the wsis started, and one has to remember the context, it was before the dot-com bubble burst. And so people in the United Nations, probably not the ones at the wsis, aren't good economists, and they didn't see the bubble coming. And they basically said, there's all these tech companies, there's all this products being sold, and it's generating so much money, and the riches are there. This is the perfect time to do a summit on this, because we'll be able to just, have companies just donate things to us, and there's just so much money, they'll just be able to give us things. Well, before, what happened is that bubble burst. And so we found ourselves in a situation that countries still had this need. They wanted to use technology to increase the ability of their citizens to be productive lives, to give them new things to be able to do, also for people to be wealthy as well. One has to be conscious that the wealth isn't distributed well in countries, but they saw that as an opportunity. And the problem was, you then get into a discussion is, the country said, we want new money. We want countries, Germany, the EU, to give us more than just the money to rebuild after the tsunami. We actually want computers in our schools, but we can't afford them, but we want them. And so what are some of the issues that were there is that the African countries said, well, everyone always talks, they have a concept of solidarity, of helping each other. And they said, well, let's create a fund, a pool of money that countries can contribute to, or you can get some money, and then that kind of helps all of us. And so it was a very kind of visionary, very idealistic of, let's create a fund. And some of these people had studied other economic models, and they said, well, many years previously, there had been something called the Tobin tax, which was of all the financial transactions, you tax a certain percentage and you use that for development. And they said, well, and this is, if there's so many products being sold in rich countries, in Europe, in North America, why don't we take and add a tax to that? And all that money that's generated goes to help poorer countries. So for a lot of people, it's like, oh, it's not a bad idea. That's a way to be solidarity. The problem is countries like the US are really opposed to paying taxes. And other countries said, well, you can generate all this thing with taxes, but then you give it to a country, and then does it go into a bank account in Switzerland, or does it actually help people? And so is it issues of corruption? Is there other things? And so they didn't really like the idea of taxes because they just wanted more information around it. And so that whole idea of being solidarity through adding a price to things didn't work out. And the rich countries, a lot of the businesses said it's just market forces that should prevail. Countries should just allow foreign companies to take over telecommunications and things, and that will help things. Trade liberalization is the panacea that will work for everything. And then civil society, not governments, not business, said, this is like water. I mean, the internet today is like the water of yesterday and of today. This is something that needs to be accessible by everyone. It should be treated as that. And there's specific models on how you do that. It shouldn't be privatized, but it should really be encouraged. And so those were some of the discussions that were there, some of the issues that we're trying to decide. So what happened as a result? And at the end, they said, oh, a fund is a really good idea, but let's make it voluntary, but no one volunteers. And so there's a fund, so if a country wants to contribute, if individuals or companies want to, they can, but it's all voluntary, so no one's obliged to. And everyone said that's great.
I think the irony with the fund at the moment is they've raised like 5 million Swiss francs or something, and this money so far only came from African countries.
And I'll add two things. It's just the other thing too is that the organization that's doing this eats up 80% of the overhead. So it's an 80% overhead cost. So they may have 5 or it may be actually more than that, but they have really nice offices. And that's the problem. Some of the countries said is, don't spend it in the offices. Actually spend it with the people. And so now the issue is, you have projects like the $100 computer and other things to try to saying, well, you know, it's just initiatives from people that will work. And so, you know, we can get into, you know, if you, once we're done, we can get into more of the specifics, but the problem is it wasn't really solved. There's all these ideas on how things should be done, but no one's actually given any money. So there was a lot of discussions on internet governance, and at the end, there wasn't really much promised. And now Tunisia. Does that mean?
Maybe the last part on financing. To quickly come back to that.
Well, just two short questions
Yeah,
to that Solidarity Fund.
Just to finish up the financing and then questions, okay?
Okay.
So, as Robert said, most of the rich governments said the market will solve everything, just open up your markets in developing countries for our products and our companies, and that's it. The Africans had Digital Solidarity Fund, and they already had set it up before the summit took place, so the summit just could agree on, well, we take note and welcome the Digital Solidarity Fund, but we insist that it's voluntary if you want to donate. What we were still able to make sure keeps in the official summit declaration, in the official text, is that they at least acknowledge that in some situations there is a need for public financing, that in some regions or developing countries or something where there is not yet enough demand, or especially in rural areas where just the population density is not high enough, private companies just won't invest and won't roll out broadband cables. So in these circumstances you need public funding and public investment so that markets can start to develop afterwards. And they at least also agreed on that afterwards. But that was really after heavy lobbying from our side. Okay.
Next? Yeah. Yeah, okay. So the next section here is Tunisia. And so some of the questions asked by a lot of people is like, well, why the hell did you do it in Tunisia in the first place? And a lot of people asked that. And, you know, some of the things said, well, were they just in the room and they basically said, we want to do it? Or was there some particular reason why? And as I mentioned earlier, the idea had come up that there should be a World Summit on the Information Society. And so that's a good question. And the quick answer is, well, there's a bit of history behind that. And their history was that the idea to set up a World Summit on the Information Society excuse me, came from Africa. And it turns out that at the time that that proposal came forward, Tunisia was basically representing the African countries. And so in the name of Africa, it said, we think it's a good idea to talk about the digital divide and there should be a UN summit. And so they put it forward, and they're a very proud nation, and they like having a lot of press, and they basically said, not only do we think that this should be done, but we should do it too. And so a lot of countries said, let's see, let's think about it. And no one really thought it was going to happen. But it worked its way through the different international agencies, it worked its way to the UN, and about 2 years later, a lot of countries realized, oh my God, it's going to happen, and it's going to happen in Tunisia. This is a terrible thing. And so what happens is said, well, where can we do it instead? And it's like, well, it's the International Telecommunications Union that put the idea forward. Ooh, they're based in Switzerland. Let Switzerland do it. Well, the problem at the time is Switzerland was not a member of the United Nations. And so Switzerland became a member of the United Nations, and then right afterwards, they held their very first summit, even though the UN is based there. But what happened is, well, we're trying to decide this, and the Swiss saying, okay, we can do it, and people were like, okay, Switzerland is friendlier than Tunisia. The Tunisians were like, but this was supposed to be about Africa. This was supposed to be about bridging the digital divide. Switzerland should not have this. And so they started having this very heated discussion. And at the end, they couldn't come to an agreement. And so they basically said, okay, let's do it in both places. Which is a big problem, because usually one of these events takes place once, it comes up with things that they have to do, and it finishes. And so what happens is they had a first summit, and then they had a second one, and this had never been done before. And so that was a very challenging thing. And so that's, in a way, what happened. And some people kind of ask, well, how did Tunisia really force its way to actually get it? And it was at the time, a lot of these international agencies have people that direct them. And in order to get elected, you have to have countries vote for you. And so they basically said that Tunisia promised the person who's now the director of the International Telecommunications Union the votes in order to win. And they said, well, if you support us to have the summit, we'll give you all the votes of Africa and some other countries as well. And so there was a lot of politics that's going on, not really transparent, not really open, and there's a lot of problems in regards to Tunisia. I'm not sure who's the next one. Yep.
So, Tunisia. Most of you maybe know Tunisia as a nice holiday country. Maybe you can do nice holidays there, but it's not a nice country. It's a dictatorship since 1987. And normal human rights like the freedom of assembly, the freedom of expression, or other human rights are violated every day in Tunisia. And since the dictatorship started in 1987, they have something like a Gleichschaltung. We know it from the Third Reich in Germany. All the opposition parties and groups are now in Paris, France, or they are in the prison in Tunisia, or they are not allowed to talk about politics anymore. And there's lots of torture in Tunisia, and absolutely no opposition. They have a president, President Ali. He's the president for his whole lifetime. So 2 years before, they thought, okay, maybe we need a bit more public relations on that lifetime presidential, and they did a re-voting on that and asked the citizens of Tunisia, do you really want that President Ali will be a lifetime president? And 99.2% said, yes, we will. And everywhere in Tunisia you see pictures of President Ali. It's more like a Jesus in Germany or something else. It's everywhere. We have pictures later. Next slide. So, this is President Ali, Ben Ali. You see him everywhere. You don't believe it. In every cafe, in every bar, in the supermarket, he's hanging there and on different pictures. And under President Ali, you see some of the propaganda we saw everywhere too in Tunisia. It's a welcome to Tunis, digital capital, land of peace, solidarity and tolerance. And they missed writing about their secret services and secret police and other stuff. You see on the right side Tunisian Gongos. We call them Gongos. They are officially non-governmental organizations from Tunisia who was involved in the wsis process as civil society, like us. But if you imagine the GDR, did you know that there is that there has been an independent civil society in the GDR? It's the same like with Tunisia. And the Tunisian government sent lots of these Gongos, governmental, non-governmental organizations, members to the PrepComs, to the Congress, to represent Tunisian civil society and Tunisian citizens. And they wasted a lot of resources of our works in being there, in disturbing and our meetings. We had European civil society network meetings where lots of Tunisians were sitting in the last row writing everything we were talking, and it was very crazy. And so after the decision was to do the second summit in Tunis, we were talking about an alternative summit. We wanted to do an alternative summit because from civil society perspective, the whole wsis process went into a direction we didn't really want it. We wanted to talk about human rights in the information society. We wanted to talk about access to knowledge, about all that stuff, and the diplomats and governments wanted to talk about, ICANN or ITU or bridging the digital gap and stuff like that. So we thought about, okay, let's do an alternative summit to do first solidarity with the some independent Tunisian opposition groups and to discuss topics we really wanted to have a debate.